This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Home Shops, the freelance model railroad specialists. Visit homeshops.net to see their latest limited edition offerings, including the Virginia and Ohio company service tank cars and the just arrived GSC 86-foot tangent box cars, available in 7 freelance road names. Keep up with all of the new offerings by joining the Home Shops Facebook group and signing up for general shop bulletins at homeshops.net. I have received a sneak peek, and you don't want to miss what's next from Home Shops. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us as we're getting the What's Happening in Model Railroading episodes back on track. And helping me to get that back on track, we have with us the editor and publisher of Cowcatcher Magazine, Tim Blackwell. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ray. Glad to be on board.
It's great to have you here. Last I saw you, we were up in Amherst for the Model Railroad Show, and this is the first time I got to see you in person. We had talked prior to that. Seemed like you had a fairly decent, busy booth going on there. So just curious, how'd you take in Amherst?
Oh, it's always such a great show. It's really kind of overwhelming when you get down to, at least for me and folks in my parts of Texas. We don't have anything like that, but I just marvel at the job that group has done to get that show to the level that it's at. And it was a great crowd. I think they had over 18,000 folks that came through the doors.
Yeah, it's funny. I've actually heard varying numbers between 18 and 20,000. But certainly it was great to see a big crowd back at Amherst. I was there the previous year. I don't know if were you there the snow year, I guess is now being referred to as, and boy, it was definitely cool for a show goer because you had a lot of shoulder room. There's a lot of walking around, but it certainly wasn't great to see the show. But to see it bounce back this year was certainly great to have.
Well, and the snow year that you mentioned, that was just unfortunate what happened, but they still had a decent crowd. For that, not like what they had this time, but that I think that gave them hope that if they could get to 2023, then they would, put on a really good show, and they did. Absolutely, and credit to again John Sacerdote and the folks at the Amherst Railway Society for an outstanding job. Great show. Got to meet a lot of great people, and again, got to see you in person, and I'm sure you got to go around and see a lot of other people and get into faces. Post pandemic, getting to see people and enjoy their company. Yeah, I got a little bit of time to get out, but mostly I was there at the booth, just taking care of business, handing out some magazines, trying to get the word out about the Cowcatcher. Absolutely, and I've got my copy here. I got that hand delivered from your hand to mine. Wow. The February 2023. I feel pretty special getting the hand delivered copy. Not many people get that. No, I'm like, I must be somebody special. No, this is it's a great magazine, and this is not my first issue of Cowcatcher Magazine. I remember putting my hands on the first. I was turned on to your magazine by Chris Atkins and Chris Palmieri and Greg McComas, all that Texas connection there. Mm-hmm. And they said, you got to get your hands on Cowcatcher and read it. So I did. And I'm very impressed by this magazine. So, well, thank you. And thrilled to have you here. Why don't we talk about Cowcatcher Magazine for a few minutes? Because I know this is a big year for you. It's our 20th year, and it's something that I never imagined when I started it. It's really, especially in the last probably 10 years, it's taken root, and we are pretty much coast to coast and border to border in the U.S. Yeah, so as people have described it, I guess it started off kind of like a local thing, like a Southwest kind of thing, but yeah, it all conveys. I look through these articles, and there may be some Southwest flavor to it, but there's a lot of national coverage here. That's really great. We focus not just model railroading, or not just on real railroading, or not just on historical. It's a combination of all, and it's more. We try to go more for the human interest. We know the model railroad press is going to cover all the product announcements and things like that, and or the internet. But we try to feature kind of behind the scenes who the people are that are behind this great passion of railroading and model railroading.
Yeah, and one thing I found that was fascinating as well is you have model railroading coverage, and then you have the actual prototype coverage, and you have some articles in here, the January, February copy here. You're talking about the destruction of Tower 55. You've got some other things that are that are relevant, even to a model railroader as the industry changes on the prototype. So does the modeling of the prototype, and you've brought a lot of interesting articles to that as well.
Well, I've been fortunate that we have some really great contributors, and Ken Fitzgerald, you mentioned Tower 55. Some of those photos are his. He is a well-known railroad photographer who has done work for several railroads, actual railroads. We have, I got to mention Pat Hyatt, who is a former railroad PR guy. He writes columns on great passenger trains. Have a fantastic copy editor that actually we date back to my college days. So we've got some really good people that help us out, and that's helped get us to where we're at.
I know one of the things that's probably also helping your magazine is your roles within the Hobby Manufacturers Association. I got here that you're the vice president of the Model Railroad Industry Division. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the HMA and then your role within the Model Railroad Industry Division?
Well, sometimes you're at the right place at the right time, or maybe.
They do say timing is everything.
Yeah, and be careful how high you raise your hand.
There you go.
The Hobby Manufacturers Association is a group that's been around for a long, long time, and they represent all hobbies, not just model railroads, but RC and diecast model cars or what have you. There are about 4 divisions in it, and the Model Railroad Industry Division is one of them. And we have a council, about 6 or 7 members, made up of manufacturers, and we meet once a month, and we try to figure out a way to not just keep folks interested in this hobby, but to grow it. So I think this is my 3rd term that I've been on it.
And what have you kind of seen in your 3 years? I mean, have you seen what kind of development within, trying to grow the hobby? What do you think some of the major takeaways from that have been?
The main thing is we have a video, an HMA video, that is out on YouTube and other platforms. It's a short video, but it's promoting the hobby, and it came out. I think we did that during the pandemic when everybody was sitting at home looking for things to do.
Sure.
And it's just something to build awareness, and anything that we can do to build awareness on social media or distribute flyers at shows. We're just trying to basically get the manufacturers involved and to just help in keeping things going.
The manufacturing holds such a pivotal role in that, making products that appeal to younger generations and keeping it diverse so that it invites a whole group of people into the hobby.
Yeah, exactly. One of the big things that we're doing now is we are working with the NMRA on the National Train Show and trying to get a greater presence, get the manufacturers to have a greater presence at the show, which in the past, the NMRA National Train Show was the show where a lot of manufacturers announce their major products and so forth. Obviously, the internet and social media kind of put a dent in that, but the manufacturers kind of and the NMRA train show kind of drifted apart. There's a new regime, if you will, in the NMRA, led by Gordy Robinson, and he and his group are trying to transform the NMRA back to where it once was, and restore some of the relationships, not just with manufacturers, but also members. So we're excited about the possibilities of that. And we've had a few calls with them, including one here recently about the national convention that's going to be here in our backyard in Grapevine, Texas, that's coming up, I think, in August. So I guess to answer your question, if there's what are we doing, that's the type of things that we're doing. It's just trying to get everybody all on the same page and work together so we can keep this hobby growing, and it is growing. The pandemic was certainly good to us.
Yeah, that's the, kind of the sad positives that come out of the pandemic is the growth of our hobby with people stuck home and looking for things to do. And, the model railroading hobby certainly benefited from that time. And you mentioned the NMRA, and I want to say that, even I'm noticing, in the last few years, and especially under Gordy, we've seen some good fresh blood being pumped into the national organization, and
absolutely
some forward thinking, some modern thinking that's going to relate to younger people, because it's so important to everybody, the manufacturers, the hobbyists themselves, to have a robust market available. It benefits everyone.
Right. And the main thing with Gordy is, he understands they need to listen to what everybody else in the hobby is saying, and they need to be accessible. And they're doing both of that right now. They've got, I don't know if you know of Christina Zambri. She's the social media person with NMRA, and she is literally going out into the field to meet with divisions and regions to improve communications and show them how they can be more visible in social media and out there in the model railroad world.
Yeah, in the modern age where everything is at our fingertips, to have the national organization accessible. I mean, right down to a point, I went this past weekend to my local division meeting, and they do a live stream plus in person. And who's in the live stream? Gordy Robinson. So he's attending,
wow.
He's attending a division meeting, and
wow.
And that's super cool to have the president of the national, knowing that he's over in the UK. It was probably middle of the day for him when we had the meeting in the morning, and still taking time to listen in and hear what's happening at a local division meeting within Connecticut is really cool. And they even at Amherst had a meeting at there. They had people come in from all over the world to do a meeting there for the NMRA, and then they were accessible. Go over, talk to them at the booth. I didn't get to see Gordy though. Did you get to see Gordy?
Gordy was in and out. I was fortunate to get about 5 minutes with him to do an interview, and he's just really in demand, and no wonder why, right. Because he's the guy and making it happen. But he was there.
Yeah, and he's got people, and I say him, but under his leadership, right? But there's a lot of great people underneath him that he's putting in place, and but under that leadership, seeing some really exciting things out of the NMRA, which is great. And people to understand what's the value of being an NMRA member is right. So critical. Like selling anything, you got to understand what the value is, and they're certainly working on getting the value add back to membership.
Well, and if you look back on the pandemic, and Gordy was a big part of this when they came out with their NMRAX and their Zoom meetings, that has probably done the most to unite the NMRA in recent years than anything. And sadly, I guess it took a pandemic to do it, but they really started building some great visibility through all that.
Yeah, and again, the more takeaways from the awful pandemic was, all the ability for us to now understand that, the video streaming, the connectivity that we can do. Boy, I wish I had a time machine, put some money back in Zoom, right? That thing took off like wildfire, and but it was all the great things that now, even like I said, my division, they've got people that are staying at home for various reasons, or maybe even or for convenience or whatever the case may be, but they still remain connected thanks to all the things that we've developed during that pandemic time.
Yep.
So, well, that rolls us into kind of one of the articles I wanted to talk about in the latest Cowcatcher magazine. You had run a survey, and I'd like you to kind of talk about the survey process first. You did a survey on the 2023 state of model railroading. So, So let's talk about the data collection process first.
Okay, so this is, I think this was our fourth survey, and what we do is we use a survey platform, and we poll our readers, our subscribers, I should say, kind of a perk that comes along with being a subscriber. And we ask them anywhere from 20 to 25 questions about model railroading, and it varies from certainly demographic information about what scale and what do you like, and to how the manufacturers are performing with models, quality, what are their interests in specifically in model railroading, so on and so forth. And we've been fortunate to have really good response in these surveys.
So you get all this data back. Kind of curious, what would you say was maybe the more surprising result of this survey to you? One
of the things that kind of surprised me, and this kind of ties back to what we're doing on the council. I at the end of the survey, I asked readers to give me any comments about anything you want to talk about, and we get the invariably we get some of the hobby is dying kind of comments, and some of the comments this year were a recognition that the hobby isn't dying, that things are moving forward.
Right.
And I guess that kind of, I saw a couple of those, and I was like, wow, some people are getting it, because there is a lot of things going on behind the scenes that a lot of folks other than the council are doing to keep the hobby on an upward trajectory. But that would probably be the one thing that kind of sticks out in my mind.
Yeah, we hear that quite a bit, don't we? The hobby is dying, or the hobby, and I think, at least from my perspective, it's not dying, it's evolving, and it's constantly evolving. And if you're a guy who, I don't know, I don't even want to try to put an example together for fear that I'll get hate mail, but which is fine too, but aroundthelayout@gmail.com, send them on. But the hobby's evolving, and if you think it's going to stay the same forever, you're wrong, because nothing stays the same forever very long. It's constantly evolving, no. Right? So I think that's where people put a perception in, because it's not the hobby that they're used to, or because technology is coming in and they don't want to adapt or not interested. So they see it going in a different way, and the old stuff's no longer available. Oh, it's dying. Well, no, we're now transitioning to something else.
Yeah. And I see examples of this pretty regularly. And, you mentioned Greg McComas and Chris Palmerian. Those guys they're doing a lot to advance the hobby by the type of products that they're putting out on the market. And we've talked about this, I think, that there is a kind of a sub-layer of model railroaders out there that, and I think they're younger, who have layouts. They may be freelance layouts, but they are very knowledgeable about prototypical railroading and how that translates to model railroading. And that's very fresh approach to see that we have this group out there, and I suppose you see them at shows. I think you hear more about them on social media. I assume they maybe NMRA members or do Zoom meetings and all that stuff. I don't know, but I know they're out there. I've seen them and heard about them, and just like what Chris is doing with those freelance roads.
Right.
Those are all internet-driven railroads, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. So what we're talking about, for folks that don't know, is Home Shops with Chris Palmieri, and he's created a line of rail cars produced by now a growing list of manufacturers he's working with to produce freelance roads. And that all gets driven by exactly what you said, the connect, the railroads that are, networking well, have a good social media presence, and have, themselves well known to others that are really driving that.
Yeah. And this even actually kind of came up in a council meeting, that these modelers, they like modern equipment, but they also like, the second generation equipment. But when they model, let's say a GP38, they want it to look like what it looks like today, out on a short line, and all the modifications that have been made to it on the exterior that weren't there when the thing rolled out in the 1970s or 60s or whenever that was.
Ditch lights. Got to have ditch lights.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Positive train control.
Sure.
They want all that. And,
right.
And that's driving guys like Mack Rail, who are making these detail parts that will help bring that locomotive up to the 2023 or 2022.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the big shifts that I've seen, and kind of, not really covered, but you talked about, actually you have a little piece on detail parts and whatnot that you just mentioned in this article. Folks get themselves a copy of this and take a look at the article. It's a great article and some interesting results. One thing that I don't see in here, but it seems to me a kind of a shift in the hobby that's kind of changing things too. And you certainly see it in results of a Facebook group that my good friend Paul Cassar has put together. The shift to smaller shelf layouts versus the big layout, and I think that's a major shift in the hobby, to me at least. In what I've got, I have no data to back it up. I don't have a survey like yours, but it just seems like, and I love going to a layout that's a big layout and seeing a lot of running, a lot of big stuff, but it just seems like what we've seen lately on the covers of other magazines are not these massive railroads anymore. They're the smaller shelf layout where guys can drill down in super detail and have the room for it.
Yeah, and I have readers that regularly remind me that I'm not doing enough articles on small layouts. We tend to drift towards those big monster layouts that we all wish we had the time and resources to build.
Right.
But yeah, really the smaller layouts are something that I think, as you say, and again, I don't have any data on it, but they are growing a little bit and becoming a little bit more popular. Number one, it's obviously you got to have the space to build a big layout, but you also have to have significant resources and time.
Right.
But that stream of thought is what has helped modular groups really become popular over the years. And one in particular, and we're actually doing a story on it in our March-April issue about N-Rail or N-Track. They're celebrating a big anniversary this year, 50 years.
Wow.
They have basically thrived off of being able to bring people into the hobby and say, you don't need a big room to build a layout. All you need is this X foot long and X foot wide module, and bring it to a show or an event and hook it up to ours, and you can run a train as long as you want to run, and then you take it down and you go home. And that really helped, especially in N-scale, drive N-scale to the point where it is now. But now you see HO modular groups, O-scale modular groups. So that's really been a phenomenon here in the last several years.
Yeah, I was looking at, you talked about the scales, and you have some numbers on it here from your survey. 78% say they run or collect HO equipment, followed by N-scale. N-scale and O-scale almost dead race with each other. 27.5% for N, and O-scale at 27%. Narrow gauge is 11%. G-scale is at 15, and our friends that do S-scale, I can think of a couple, 7.5. It might be just those two that make up the 7.5. I'm picking on those guys, of course, Mike Ostertag and Ken Zeska and others, but
it's a very underrated scale.
It is, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then Z-scale at 4%. Those S-scale guys, they have their own opinions about the hobby because it's a different, obviously, for them. The rolling stock and locomotives are hard to find for them, but boy, they've got the run of the mill when it comes to vehicles. They've got their choices, right? So they stop complaining so much. You guys got it good with the vehicles. Us HO guys, struggle to find modern vehicles, and there's one of my main things is trying to find modern cars in HO.
In scale too.
Yeah, and I imagine in scale.
It's worse.
But what would you say, we're talking about the cars and kind of my gripe, what would you say, as you kind of look at this, and in my head, I'm kind of doing like a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And, what are some of kind of the opportunities within the hobby, some things that we may be missing that would be good to see?
Wow, that's a tough one there. One of the things that I think the hobby has done a really good job at in recent years is integrating digital technology through operations, being able to use your cell phone to operate. I know that operations aren't appealing to just everyone, but I think as long as we keep moving forward in technology, as long as manufacturers recognize that modelers now are no longer generally interested in, especially new modelers coming in modeling the 40s, or the 60s, or whatever. They want modern equipment, which translates to our modern vehicles that we could use in HO and N-scale. The opportunity, in my mind, is recognizing that we have to evolve, like you mentioned earlier in this podcast, and that we have to keep up with the times. Things change, as you mentioned earlier. And if model railroading gets stuck in the steam era, when those guys are gone who are steam fans, there's not going to be anybody left to pick up the ball, because the younger modelers, they want to see the latest Amtrak locomotive and train sets, and the manufacturers are doing a good job of keeping that product, up to date. As long as we keep doing that, I think that's the greatest opportunity of all.
Yeah, for sure. And you key on something even your reader said in these columns here. I'll read one from Ron from Norwalk, Ohio. Need to get the younger generation interested in the hobby of model railroading and preserving the art of trains and model railroading. And well said, Ron. I think a big key of that is to the relatability. And you hit on two key points, which is one is what does the younger generation relate to in railroading? They don't relate to necessarily steam. I've had some arguments about that, and okay, there are some that like the steam stuff, but I would say the vast majority, if you went out and you talk to kids that are in the hobby from, say, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 to 10 years old up to 16, 17 years old, what they're used to seeing is big SD70 Aces and Gevos, and that's the stuff they're seeing, the big class ones, the CSX, BNSF and new paint, and Norfolk Southern with horse heads on them, and that's what they're used to. They'll see a heritage unit every once in a while, that thanks to the railroads that have done that, but That's what they're used to, and that's what they relate to. That's the railroading they see, the intermodal traffic, the auto rack traffic. That's railroading to them as much as, you know, the 80s and 90s were to me and to other people, you know, their era when they were young, what influenced them and what introduced them to the hobby. So it's relatability. And the technology is also the relatability. The things that their kids are doing, my young kids, I have, you know, two under 10, and they bring in stuff that, you know, they're showing me how to do now. And I thought I was pretty technologically savvy, right? But these kids, they're growing up with that, and they have these devices in their hands, and we have to continue to drive that technology forward to keep them interested, because that's what they're used to. That's what they've grown up with. Yeah.
And speaking of kids, and I'm not promoting the March, April issue here. This is not a big shout out, but
it is a big shout out. You should get the March, April issue of Cowcatcher Magazine, and we're going to put links in the show notes so that folks can subscribe to Cowcatcher Magazine, because that's one they have to get in their hands. But continue on, Tim, with your shameless plug.
I appreciate that. Okay, so we have a regular contributor. His name is Pete Leach. He's out of Houston, and he does some fantastic articles about his ON30 lay, and we've run a few of them, and we're running one again, I believe, in the March, April issue. And so in the course of him sending the story over and some photos of his layout, he says, okay, here's an extra one, by the way. It's a photo that my 13-year-old grandson took. And if you think it's something you can use, then feel free to. So I wasn't sure what to expect, and then I opened up the photo, and I saw this beautiful photo of this beautiful layout. It's an in-scale layout that he and his little brother had created, and the photo was a shot of a Conrail local going through this little downtown area, and it was perfectly in focus. He had used his grandfather's photo layering program. I forget now what it's called, but many of you might be familiar with it. And it was just a gorgeous shot, and the modeling was as exceptional. It was better. If I think back at 13, I mean, I wasn't really in the hobby at that point, but I'm pretty sure I couldn't have done as well as what this young man had done, which goes back to what you were saying about kids these days. They can do so much more and know so much more than we did at their age. But we're running that photo in the March, April issue, and I'm thrilled to see that type of an example of that younger generation that we all hope, you know, will help carry us forward in this hobby.
Absolutely. It's great to see. And, you know, you talk about, it's been a few years since I was 13, maybe for you as well, Tim, maybe just a few.
Couple.
But think about the resources that have been made available to them as well. And I'm not slighting, I'm saying it's fantastic. Everything's right at their fingertips. A YouTube tutorial on ballasting, a YouTube tutorial. I mean, you could just type in ballasting, and you could sit there for a week and watch videos on ballasting. Yeah. You know, before it was, you know, prior to this internet age, for anybody who doesn't remember before the internet, you had to know somebody, or hopefully it was in a magazine, or you go to your hobby shop and, you know, ask the guy at the hobby shop, hey, how do you ballast? And maybe he can tell you, or somebody else can tell you, or you'd have to network. Now it's right there. That information is right at their fingertips. And that's what's going to really help the hobby keep moving forward, is the content creation that continues to be made, whether magazines or podcasts, or certainly YouTube videos and channels that connect them and provide all that information back to them.
Yeah, and it's not just model railroading or hobbies. It's just about anything you can do. You got a part on your car that you're not sure how to replace. I guarantee you there's a YouTube video out there somewhere on it.
Yeah, anywhere from fixing your washing machine to anything, the resource. And it's great that those that are listening, that create content of the sort that I was speaking of, thank you, because it's really helping move the hobby forward for all of us.
Yeah. And one of the things I failed to mention, if you don't mind, I'd like to add about what some of these companies are doing is Walthers and Cato USA are very active into scholarship programs and the STEAM education programs, and that's helping bring some younger folks into the hobby. At the Train Fest in Milwaukee, Cato actually, they had a display of these were modules, very small modules that were done by fourth graders at a local elementary school in the Chicago area. And these kids collaborated with their peers in Japan who were doing the same type of modules. It was basically a piece of Cato Unitrack, and they built a scene around it. And so these are fourth graders that are doing this kind of extra credit, which is pretty refreshing.
Yeah, that's great to see young kids involved and having them understand railroad history, having them understand modern railroading. There's just a lot of unique ways to get into it. I've seen, some of these layouts, and maybe I'll go a little of a tangent here, but kind of bringing kids involved. We want to relate to them on the modern side, teach the history. But there's so many layouts that serve as history lessons too, and and I think that's just a fantastic opportunity for someone, whether you're a club or it's your individual layout, is the ability to teach history using a layout.
Yes.
To say, okay, this is what this actually looked like. I mean, I love history, and I went to a gentleman's layout this past weekend. He's modeling an area in New Britain, Connecticut, and I'm familiar with New Britain. It's not too far from my house, but when he was telling me about this, and the gentleman's name's Randy Hamill, he was showing me it, and I was like, oh, it was just neat to hear the history of Stanley Works in New Britain and, how much of an impact they had on that city and the railroading and everything else. And man, you could teach so many really cool lessons using these layouts. If even if it's kind of proto freelance, but kind of covers the idea, a lot of great opportunity there.
Yeah, and I mean those lessons are what model railroading is all about. I mean, you think about it, all the skills that you need to make a layout or build a model. It's basic skills that you're going to use elsewhere every day in your life. Carpentry, electrical. Well, hopefully you're not, dealing too much in electrical. I make sure I hire somebody for that. But anyway, it's just some fundamental skills that you're going to use the rest of your life.
Absolutely. It's an enjoyment of so many different, skill sets, vocations that tie into model railroading that just makes it really it is the world's greatest hobby, because to find a hobby that's that diverse, it's hard to find. It's just a combination of so many other things, art and history, and like you said, the vocations, and it's just amazing.
It is, and it's also, and I applaud folks like you who are doing these podcasts or these video shows. That's a part of the hobby that has evolved, and these types of things just help bring that community together. And that's, when you get right down to it, that's what the Cowcatcher is about. It's about the community of model railroading and rail enthusiasm. It's about bringing everybody together in a common interest, common cause, and your podcast and others just kind of help cement bringing that community together, and that's diamonds, man.
Well, it goes along with my belief that I found early on, this hobby is so much better shared. Yes. And when and again, I've talked to it multiple times on podcasts. It's okay to be a lone wolf. There's nothing wrong with that, but when you come out of the basement or come out of the shed or come out of wherever your layout is, and you talk to somebody else and you find like-minded people, that the hobby just grows multitude over the building the friendships, the relationships, getting to talk to people. For me, sitting here in Connecticut, talking to an editor that lives in Texas, and being connected, and and then knowing other people around you, the Chris Palmieris and the Greg McComases of the world, and the Sammy Carlyles from Oklahoma to Paul Cassar down in Sydney, Australia. It's amazing the people that you will meet, the people that you will grow friendships with when you share the hobby. So again, magazines, podcasts, video shows, YouTube videos, everything that's just, really helping us accomplish that goal of sharing this hobby out. You've done a fantastic job with this magazine, and I certainly hope my listeners get over to your website. Again, I'll share all the links, and get yourself a subscription to Cowcatcher Magazine. It's a really good one to have. I want to talk real quick before we go here. You've got an event coming up in your backyard I want to talk a little bit about, because I'm excited because I'll be in attendance as well. You have the NMRA National Convention being held in Grapevine, where most people will be calling the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Yeah, and it's a perfect venue. It's at the Gaylord Texan in Grapevine. Grapevine is just a stone's throw from the airport. And it is this really cool historic town. They've preserved Main Street, USA in Grapevine. And so the Gaylord Texan will be host of the convention. And there's a really good staff in place. Donna Orr is the convention chairman. In fact, we had her on a council call just a couple of weeks ago. They're really planning some great things. The Dallas-Fort Worth area is just a lot of rail opportunities, rail things, rail fanning. You just got a great mix of passenger, transit, and freight. BNSF headquarters is nearby, so it's a great setting for a national convention.
Yeah, and right there in Grapevine, there's a tourist railroad right in Grapevine too? Is that correct?
The Grapevine Vintage Railroad, yes. They've used to be called the Tarantula. They've been around a few years. Yeah,
so there's a thing between, it's definitely, it's August in Texas, so it'll be a slightly warm. I won't be bringing any of my sweatshirts with me for Texas in August, but there is so much to do just in general as a family in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Yeah. I've brought my family. We've found multitudes of different things to do in that region, and then the train stuff. Boy, if you want a rail fan, but you take your pick: UP, BNSF, KCS, and then you got your short lines, the Fort Worth and Western, and multitudes others of just great opportunities to get yourself to a national convention, have a nice family vacation. It's a good time just before, hopefully, well, mostly the kids going back to school. It's just before that, I believe. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward. I'm going with friends. We haven't put a solid plan together yet, but I know a lot of it's going to be some early morning rail fanning. Maybe some late night rail fanning, and then obviously the events of the convention in between, and then ending with the National Train Show, which I'm looking forward to attending as well.
Yeah, and Michelle Kempema, who's executive director of the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, she's actually helping put together some of the tours and rail fan attractions. So she is a tour planner, so I think they've got the right person working on that. And we've got a lot of layouts in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as well. And I'm going to open my N-scale layout to the LD SIG group, so that'll be on tour. But we've got some really, really great layouts in the area. A lot of them have been featured in the Model Railroad Press over the years.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to, I know Greg McComas is on my list to get over and operate. I definitely want to get over and see your layout. And, and then there's a few others, guests that have been on the show. Dean Ferris is another one in the area. I'd love to be able to get over and see his. Definitely a lot of great model railroading in that Dallas-Fort Worth area, and looking forward to getting down and being in the Lone Star State.
Yeah. Mike Armstrong has a great HO layout. He's actually not too far from me. I think Olaf Millhouse is going to have his N-scale Dakota Northern on it as well. I think it's definitely going to be worth the price of admission.
Excellent. Well, Tim, we're going to wrap this episode up of Around the Layout. I appreciate you being on to getting us, a taste of what's happening in model railroading and sharing the results of your survey. And I think we got a lot of positive things coming out of that. I think our hobby's in a pretty good place. Would you tend to agree with that?
I really think it's in a good place. I think it's in a much better place than it was, say, a decade ago. So, I'm excited. And, you mentioned Greg McComas. One quick thing about him is he is big into sharing the hobby, and he doesn't live too far from me. And when he first started coming over, he would bring one of his cars that he had done and just put it on the layout and leave it. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. He goes, just, take some pictures of it or whatever. And I soon learned out that he is part of this mindset of many modelers who share their models and equipment, and they send them around the country just for the sole purpose of putting them on a layout. You may be kind of in that same deal, but I think at first I was like, well, not so sure about this, but then I started thinking about it. I said, that is really cool. That's a great way to share the hobby. So on that, I'll let you wrap up. Yeah, well, you've hit on a great point there. Just so many unique ways to share the hobby, and that's one of them. I've got Greg's Michigan Interstate on my layout through Home Shops, and some of the ones from Chris Palmieri's Meridian Speedway. Yeah, it's just amazing to be able to share the hobby that way. I've got Easter eggs hidden all over my layout with guys that run on my layout. I'll put their names on a car somewhere. Or, there's so many fun ways to network. So again, I just continuously encourage people to get involved, because boy, you're just going to meet the greatest people and have the best time when you're able to share and go see other people's layouts. And when you find like-minded people, it's a blast. Yeah, it is. It is. We're really fortunate to be in this hobby, and that's just not PR. I really feel that way. It's really a great community, and there's so many things that you can glean from it. Absolutely. Well, and I feel fortunate that I got to meet you, Tim, and have you here on the show, and get to meet the editor of this great magazine. And I look forward to my next issue and getting you back on the podcast and talking more about what's happening in model railroading. So, Tim, thanks for being on the show. Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.